Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Michaela, and in today's video, I am here to do the second half of my July wrap-up. So if you did not catch part one of my July wrap-up where I went over the very best books that I read in July, I will go ahead and leave that video linked in the description. In today's video specifically, I will be discussing the worst and most disappointing books that I read in July. I have 9 books to talk about in this video, so let's go ahead and get right into it. The first book that I want to talk about is 0 Days by Ruth Ware. I've told myself that I was not going to read any more from her. However, because her books always get so much attention and hype, it intrigues me and makes me want to be a part of the conversation with everyone else. So in 0 Days, we are following a wife, Jack, and her husband, Gabe, who are hired by companies to break into buildings and hack security systems. After a routine assignment goes horribly wrong, Jack arrives home to find her husband dead. Jack then becomes the police's main suspect. Running out of options, Jack must clear her name and find her husband's killer. Now, I did not absolutely hate this book. There was aspects I enjoyed about it. I did find this to be a very easy read. With all of Ruth Ware's books, I do find them to be very readable and very simple. I also liked in the book how she acknowledges something that I think could be almost a plot hole of the conflict, where we're following the main character, Jack, who goes on the run from the police. The situation that she's in was impulsive and very preventable, how she decides to just immediately run from the police. But the character does so because she doesn't think that she can trust the police. She also does not care what happens to her. Her only goal is to avenge her husband's death. So I did like that she acknowledged that in the text. I also appreciated how there was commentary on the very real issue of police domestic violence. The main character, Jack, talks a bit about one of her past relationships with a police officer and how it was a very physically, mentally, and emotionally abusive relationship. I like that this book brought awareness to that issue around police domestic violence and how there's nowhere for women in these situations to turn. Getting to why I did not enjoy this book more, there's pretty much 2 twists that we have in 0 Days. The first one I felt like was very predictable early on. It was very predictable to me once we meet a certain character. I felt like I could immediately see through them and their motivations. The second twist is a huge spoiler, so I really can't say anything about it. But this is the type of twist that I do not appreciate in books. I felt like it was very unnecessary, and it was almost used as a solve-all for our characters' mental headspace. It seemed like Ruth Ware wanted everything to wrap up perfectly and neatly, and it was very silly to me. I also have to say, I know this is a very unpopular opinion, but I listened to this on audio, and the same woman narrates all of Ruth Ware's books, and that narrator is Imogen Church. I know that she is a very popular audio narrator, but for me, I never enjoy her audio narrating style. I find in all of Ruth Ware's books that she narrates, she goes so over the top and almost is overacting and makes it almost hard to believe and cringy. At the end of the day, this is not my least favorite Ruth Ware books. There's been books by her that I've disliked more, but I wouldn't highly recommend it. This isn't one that's really gonna stick with me. And I do feel like this book runs a bit too long. We get that final twist, and then there was still 40 minutes left of the book, which is pretty much just wrapping up the epilogue, and it just ran too long. There was no need for it. I feel like this book could have been faster paced, but there's just too much unnecessary content that drags out the page count. The next book that I have to talk about is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This was also a 2-star read for me. I got to the end of this book and I honestly had no idea what I had just read. So in The Turn of the Screw, we are following the story of a young, inexperienced governess who is charged with the care of 2 children, Miles and Flora, who are 2 small orphans abandoned by their uncle at his great country house. The governess then begins seeing different ghostly figures in the house. When I got to the end of this book, I had no idea what I had just read. The only reason I had even a little bit of comprehension of what went on in this is because I had previously watched the show The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is loosely based on The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Also, Ruth Ware's book, The Turn of the Key, which I have read, helped me understand a little bit what went on in this book. I listened to this one on audio and I slowed my speed way down to way lower than the speed I normally listen to, and I still feel like this entire book went over my head. When I got to the end of this book, I honestly felt like I hadn't even read it because I didn't grasp hardly anything. After reading this book, I went to read several Goodreads reviews because I wanted to see what other people thought about this book. And one reviewer put a quote from this book in the review, and I want to read it to you guys because it is the perfect example of just how unhinged Henry James' writing style is. So listen to this quote. "And that she wanted, by just so much as she did thus see, to make me suppose she didn't, and at the same time, without showing anything, arrive at a guess as to whether I myself did." Truly, what does that even mean? Like, this author, I want to say to him, edit yourself. After reading this book, I would never choose to reread this book or anything else from the author Henry James. There are just too many books out there that I am interested in before I'm going to give my time to an author that deliberately writes in a way that is convoluted and confusing. The next book that I have to talk about is The Night It Ended by Katie Gardner, and this one was also a 2-star read. Almost every book that I have to talk about in this video I rated 2 stars. I think there was 1 3-star and everything else is a 2. In this book, we are following a psychiatrist who is called in to help investigate the mysterious death at a boarding school for troubled teenage girls. It's set at a secluded campus during winter break, so while the psychiatrist is there, she interviews 4 different students and several of the staff members to try to piece together what happened to the student who died. Ultimately, I found this book to be very anticlimactic. And I think that was because it's just very, very, very slow and way too long. The audio narrator, I do not think was the right choice for this book. Her intonation was very distracting and extremely melodramatic. The narrator of The Night It Ended was X.E. Sands, who I know is also another very popular audio narrator. And I know I have read books by her before that I have enjoyed her narration style, but for some reason in this book, it just was so dramatic. And I couldn't tell if it was the book or if it was the audio narrator. This one takes a long time to get into, and by a quarter of the way into the book, I felt like nothing was happening. Nothing in the plot was really happening. And nothing about the writing was really hooking me. So ultimately, this was just a very slow, tedious read. There is also another twist at the very, very end of this book that I was extremely confused about. I don't know what I was missing. It's probably my fault that I just wasn't hooked by this, so I didn't pay close enough attention early on in the book. But I was too bored along the way. The audio narrator was really annoying me, so I didn't want to stick around, reread, and try to figure out what I had missed. Really, this one was not for me, and it's not one that I would highly recommend. The next book that I have to talk about is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Bayron. This is a new release YA horror thriller. In this book, we are following our main character, Charity Curtis, who has the summer job of her dreams, where she is playing the final girl at Camp Mirror Lake. Guests pay to be scared in a full-contact terror game based on a classic slasher film. But the last weekend of the season, Charity's coworkers begin disappearing. And when one ends up dead, Charity and her friends have to try to make it out alive. This was another book that took me a while to get into and to figure out what was happening, what was going on, especially for how short this book is. I do feel like there was pacing issues. The dialogue in this book was very painful. The writing was very cheesy. Honestly, I'd love to hear from the target audience of this book and see if they could appreciate it. Maybe I'm just too old for this and needed something a little more serious, because the ultimate twist of this book was just ridiculous. It's so over the top that I could not take the story seriously, and therefore nothing about it was actually scary. I also would not recommend the audiobook because, once again, the audio narration style was very off-putting and gave me secondhand embarrassment. I don't know if it was her narration or the bad dialogue she was working with, but I feel like they mixed together to make just this horrible soup of bad reading experience. I did write down a quote of this book that was an example of the dialogue and the writing being very cheesy. Now, this is a quote spoken by one of the characters that is said in all seriousness and is meant to be a serious, scary moment. So it basically says, "I will make this land run red with the blood of 1,000 camp counselors." That to me read like a Scooby-Doo villain moment where the villain is like twirling their mustache. Ultimately, the one positive that I can say for this book is that the last page had a very good, actually creepy twist that I really enjoyed, but the book as a whole was not for me, and I would not say go read this entire book just for the final page. The next book that I have to talk about is 𝚲𝚃 by Jimmy Giuliano. I feel like I may be in the unpopular opinion of this book because I feel like I've been seeing a lot of really positive reviews coming in. However, for me, this was a 2-star book. And once again, it will not be one that sticks with me at all. So in this book, 𝚲𝚃, we are following the main character, Willow, who, after her son recently passes away, she finds the words in his bedroom, Clifford Island, written on the floor. She then sets out to find the island and go to Clifford, but once she gets there, she realizes that this place is not normal. Everyone on this island seems to be stuck in the year 1994. They wear outdated clothing and avoid modern technology. When Willow asks questions to the people on the island, they are evasive. But she learns one thing: always close your curtains at night. 5 weeks after Willow arrives on the island, she disappears. From there, Willow's brother Harper comes to Clifford Island to search for her. This was one that I was enjoying in the beginning of the book. The very beginning, there's a note to the reader that is very ominous. It had me seriously questioning if it was for real. Like when you watch the Blair Witch Project, for example, and you're wondering, was that real? Did that actually happen? You know? Or was that just me? That cannot just be me. So this book reminded me a lot of that. However, around the middle of the book, I did start to get very bored. We follow 3 different character POVs in this book, and a lot of the chapters focus on Willow's brother Harper and him trying to go to Clifford Island and find his sister and figure out what happened to her. I felt, especially during his chapters, the pacing being very off. We were rehashing the same things that the reader had already learned before in Willow's perspective, because she goes to the island first and we're following her POV, and then we'll switch to her brother Harper's POV. But we first see everything through her eyes. And then he goes to the island and kind of has to learn all those things over again. So it felt like rehashing a lot of information that we had already seen, which was very repetitive. Ultimately, why this was a 2-star book for me was the ending. This was honestly one of the most unsatisfying endings I have ever read. It totally lost me. Like, the twist lost me. The twist ending of this book was very convoluted. I also just did not understand what this book was trying to say with this sort of ending. It just felt like we really didn't get any action at all in this book. There's no payoff. Maybe it was just me, but I felt like this book ran too long. and the ending was very unsatisfying. The next book that I read was the second book in the 𝚆𝙾𝙽𝚃𝙷 series by Agatha Christie, and that book is The Murder on the Links. In this book, it's just like any of the books in the 𝚆𝙾𝙽𝚃𝙷 series where him and his friend Arthur Hastings go to investigate a murder. This one was not my favorite Agatha Christie book I've read so far. However, this is the 1 3-star that I said I had. Did I say that yet? Every book that I have to speak about in this video was a 2-star, except for this book was a 3-star. So it was a little bit better than the rest, but this was not my favorite Agatha Christie. It was very slow. Also, I struggled with this one a lot because I do not like Arthur Hastings. He is so frustrating to me, and he is the narrator who we are following. And to just despise your narrator is never a good thing for the reader. I wish we could follow this series through Poirot's eyes. Like, I get why we don't, because then there would be no reveal. I just wish we could follow it through somebody other than Hastings because he is so frustrating. He's always wrong. He always makes dumb, preventable mistakes, and yet he is so arrogant and thinks he is so smart. He also constantly underestimates Poirot and thinks he's smarter than him. But he's not. It's so clear. And maybe that's supposed to be like the funny joke of it, but to me, it's just frustrating to read. There's a romance subplot in this book, which is another thing about Arthur Hastings that really frustrates me, is that he's always being dumb and distracted by a girl, which is so annoying because you're here to solve a murder. Okay, this is not a joke. And he does things in this book that are really dumb and really silly just because of this romance that he has going on. Like I spoke about in my best books of the month, when I talked about a few Agatha Christie books in that video, this one also has sexism in the book. And something that I really wish I had mentioned in that first video that I forgot to say was there's a difference between sexism and misogyny being used as a point in the book to make a commentary, to illustrate something, and when it is the author's inherent sexism and misogyny coming through the writing. There is a difference. And in Agatha Christie's books, I can tell that it's her own sexism coming through the writing. It's not like an intentional plot device used to illustrate something or used as a commentary that we're going to dismantle throughout the course of the book. I do realize that these were published in a different time period with different beliefs, you know, but I'm still going to comment on it, okay? I still read this book and I'm allowed to review it however I see fit. I just wish that we could get the mystery served without the side of sexism. The next book that I have to talk about is Banshee by Rachel 𝙲𝚃𝚃. This book only has like 100 or so ratings on Goodreads, so it definitely is not like a very well-known book. And I was very excited when I initially started reading this because when I first was reading it, I thought this was going to be a new favorite. I was really enjoying it. So in this book, we're following a female professor. After she receives a breast cancer diagnosis, she descends into terror and chaos and starts to implode her own life. She then begins an affair with one of her younger female students. Like I said to start, I was really enjoying this book. I found it to be very subversive. I liked seeing this female protagonist sort of rebelling against her own life, no longer repressing herself and allowing her rage to bubble up in this crisis that she's going through. However, the nail in the coffin for me with this book was the very repetitive aspect of mom guilt that we see throughout. We're following this woman who, in the beginning, I feel like the author is trying to write as a very unlikable character because she's doing these very unlikable things. She's having this affair with her younger student, she's cheating on her husband, and she seems to be having a great time with it. And that was the parts I enjoyed about this book. I wished that the author would have stuck with that and truly had her character give no cares throughout the entire thing and just like completely went for it. This character starts to have a lot of mom guilt. She wants to have an affair with this girl, but she does not want her daughter to find out about it. And she keeps saying like her daughter can't know. She goes to extreme efforts to make sure the daughter will not find out. I just wish that this author would have leaned all the way into this like problematic, repulsive character archetype, similar to what I have talked about recently with a lot of the 𝚲𝚃𝚃𝚃𝚃 books that I've read, is that author always leans all the way into making her female characters very repulsive, very unlikable, and does not try to redeem them by the end of the book. Whereas I feel like this author tried to redeem her character by the end of the book. It felt very wishy-washy and disjointed. Yeah, this one just was not for me. I feel like it had a lot of potential, but the author got scared halfway through maybe and didn't lean all the way into it, and ultimately this was only a 2-star book for me. The next book I have to talk about is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Now there's a quote I'm gonna read you right off the bat, and it's spoken by a female character, okay? And it says, "At last my life had a purpose, which was to love my child more than anything else." And what I have to say to that is, can this man please stop writing books from the POV of women? Riley Sager does not write female characters well at all. That quote is the perfect example. "At last my life had a purpose, which was to love my child more than anything else." Like, the purpose of a woman's life is just to have children and nurture them. I found this one to be genuinely confusing. Like, why did he do so much in this book? More does not mean better. I know everybody's talking about this book right now, so you probably already know what it's about, but it's basically a gothic thriller where we are following a young caregiver assigned to work for a woman accused of a Lizzie Borden-like murder decades earlier. Right away, there was things that was sticking out to me as I didn't like them, okay? There is this character, Kenny, that was the most unnecessary thing I've ever read in my life. Instant subtracting stars for this character even being included in the book. This is another example where I say this man does not know how to write women. If he did, he would not have even included that Kenny character and had him interacting with his female character. I was also so confused when I started reading this book. So if you are still gonna read this book, let me tell you something right now and keep this in mind. This book is set in the year 1983, okay? It took me way too long to figure that out because there's parts where it talks about the main character being born in the 60s, but so I thought it was set in present day, and I'm thinking, well, wouldn't that make her 60 years old herself? And she's described as like a 30-something-year-old woman. It didn't make any sense to me. And then I realized the book was set in 1983, so I don't know why he had it set in 1983. I don't really feel like there was any 80s vibes coming through. It seemed like a very throwaway plot point. I also had a very hard time keeping straight in my head the characters of this book and their relationship to one another. I did write like a lot of spoiler thoughts in my Goodreads review for this book, where I talk about all the things that confused me and all the characters I was constantly getting mixed up. Genuinely, this book was so confusing, it was so drawn out, and the plot twists were utterly ridiculous. Like I said, someone needs to tell Riley Sager that more does not mean better. Like, pick your best plot twist and give me that. And really lean all the way into that. And don't throw all these other little crumbs in along the way, because you're just going to confuse me and it's too much. The last book that I have to talk about is The Thing in the Snow by Sean Adams. Another 2-star read. I liked aspects of this book, okay? It was the type of book that I feel like is sort of becoming my brand. It was like that sort of trippy, confusing, weird fiction that I typically really enjoy. In this book, The Thing in the Snow, we are following 4 workers who live at the far reaches of the world in a research facility in a vast expanse of ice and snow. Their objective is simple: occupy the space, complete their weekly tasks, and keep the building in working order. There's just one obstacle standing in their way: a mysterious object that appears out in the snow. For some reason, I fell asleep while listening to this book at least 10 times, and I'm not even exaggerating. There was something about this book that consistently put me in a trance and made me zone out and want to fall asleep, and I don't know what it was. I kind of feel like it's the way that this book is written. It's written in a very methodical way because of the nature of what it's about and what these workers are doing. They're doing these tasks at this research facility for their work, and they're very repetitive, tedious, methodical tasks. And the book also reads in the same way. This book reminded me of a few other books. I got reminded of the book Piranesi by Susanna Clark, I think. And then also Several People Are Typing. It reminded me kind of a mix of both of those two books. That being said, I do not think that this book would be as well received as those two were. I think that a lot of people would find this book very slow and boring, similar to what I did, because nothing happens this entire book. I couldn't tell if this book was extremely deep or just complete nonsense. I read a lot of Goodreads reviews to try to figure out what this book was about because like I said, I got to the end and I had no idea what I had just read. Everyone was saying in their reviews that this was a commentary of the modern workplace. And okay, I guess I could kind of get where they were coming from with that, but I wish the conclusions that the author was drawing were more clear. This book reads like how seasonal depression feels. Because we're set in this very snowy setting and we're set in this like sterile, drab research facility where these characters are doing these monotonous tasks every day throughout the entire book, it's drab, it's gray, it's boring, it's dull. I don't know. A lot of times I do enjoy books like this that are very weird, trippy, off-center, but this one just didn't do it for me and it wasn't for me. Those were just the 9 most disappointing books that I read in July. I did, though, however, have a lot of amazing books that I read in July. So like I said, if you missed part 1 of this July wrap-up, I will go ahead and leave that first video linked in the description so you can hear me rave instead of rant about a handful of books. I also know that a lot of these are pretty popular releases and I'm kind of the outlier opinion on them, but I'm here to share with you guys my very honest opinions. I'm not going to filter my views or my opinions for anyone or anything. It just might not be for me, and I'm glad if it's for somebody else, and I acknowledge that we all have very different tastes and opinions, and what works for one person might not work for another person. A lot of my favorite books actually are books that are genuinely hated and disliked by BookTube, so I very much understand that, you know, all of our tastes are different, and that's also what makes reading so fun and exciting. If you want to go ahead and leave me a comment letting me know what was your most disappointing read in July. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.